Welcome to our discussion on regulating federal campaign contributions. Money, lots of it, is essential in electoral races today. Money and the modern campaign are inextricably linked because of the importance of costly media advertising in modern campaigns. Federal regulations require any group that contributes to candidates' campaigns to register as a political action committee or a PAC. And many interest groups form PACs as one arm of their organization. PACs are a relatively recent phenomenon, but the influence of money in electoral politics goes back a long time, as do the efforts to regulate it. Reformers have attempted to limit the impact of money on political campaigns for almost as long as campaigns have existed. Those efforts started after a scandal that erupted during the administration of President Warren Harding, 1921 to 1923. In 1921, the president transferred oil reserves at Teapot Dome, Wyoming, from the Department of the Navy to the Department of the Interior. The following year, Harding, Secretary of the Interior, leased the oil fields without competitive bidding. A Senate investigation into the deal revealed that the leasee of the fields had loaned, that's quotation marks, loaned, the Interior Secretary more than $100,000 in order to win political influence. The Interior Secretary was convicted and sentenced to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine. Dubbed the Teapot Dome scandal, this sordid affair led Congress to try to limit influence of money on politics through legislation. The Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925 sought to prevent future wrongdoing. The act aimed to regulate campaign finance by limiting campaign contributions and requiring public disclosure of campaign expenditures, and it was one of the first attempts at campaign finance regulation. But because the act did not include an enforcement mechanism, it was a weak attempt to fight corruption, and candidates found numerous loopholes in the law. The Political Activities Act of 1939, also known as the Hatch Act, which is almost always on your AP test, marked another congressional attempt to eliminate political corruption. With the growth of the federal bureaucracy as a result of the New Deal programs of President FDR, several scandals had emerged, demonstrating the problems that could arise when government employees took an active role in politics. The Hatch Act banned partisan political activities by all federal government employees except the president, the vice president, and Senate-confirmed political appointees. The act also sought to regulate the campaign finance system by limiting the amount of money a group could spend on an election and placing a $5,000 cap on contributions from an individual to a campaign committee. Although the Hatch Act was more effective than the Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925, it also contained a significant loophole. Groups that wanted to spend more than the legislated limit of $3 million simply formed additional groups. In 1971, Congress passed the Federal Election Campaign Act, or FECA, the most significant attempt at overhauling the nation's campaign finance system. The law was sponsored by Democrats in Congress who were concerned about the enormous fundraising advantage the Republicans had during the 1968 presidential election. This law placed considerable limitations on both campaign expenditures and campaign contributions, and it provided for a voluntary tax return checkoff for qualified presidential candidates. This provision enables you, when filling out your federal income tax return, to contribute $3, which will go towards the matching funds that qualified presidential candidates receive. In 1974, FECA was amended to place more stringent limitations on individual contributions and to limit expenditures by PACs, and it revamped the presidential election process by restricting spending and providing public financing for qualified candidates who abided by the limits. The act also required public disclosure of contributions and expenditures by all candidates for federal office. Most important, the act created an enforcement mechanism in the Federal Election Commission, or the FEC, the agency charged with enforcing federal campaign finance laws. In the subsequent, highly significant Supreme Court case, Buckley v. Vallejo, 1976, however, the plaintiffs contended that placing limitations on the amount an individual candidate could spend on his or her own campaign violated First Amendment protections of free speech. The court agreed, ruling that the candidate has a First Amendment right to engage in the discussion of public issues and vigorously and tirelessly to advocate his own election. This ruling paved the way for the subsequent explosion in the formation of PACs by recognizing political expenditures as a protected form of speech and removing limits on overall campaign spending, on personal expenditures by an individual candidate, and on expenditures not coordinated with a candidate's campaign and made by independent interest groups. In its Buckley ruling, the court boldly overturned the limitations on expenditures that to that point had been written into law. In 2010, the Supreme Court further cleared the way for the increased presence of money in political campaigns by more broadly interpreting First Amendment protections. In Citizens United versus the FEC, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations and labor unions are entitled to the same free speech rights that individuals enjoy, and thus their expenditures to influence the outcome of elections cannot be limited. The controversial 5-4 decision was hailed by conservatives as a recognition of free speech rights and was decreed by liberals as an avenue by which corporations could increase their stranglehold on politics and the policy process. When the Supreme Court determined that campaign expenditures constitute free speech for individuals, it had uncovered an important loophole in the Federal Elections Campaign Act of 1974. Because expenditures are protected from limitations, many PACs now use the so-called independent expenditure loophole to spend unlimited sums for or against political candidates. Independent expenditures are outlays, typically for advertising supports or opposing a candidate, that are uncoordinated with a candidate's campaign. So in other words, it's on behalf of the candidate. Although PAC contributions to a candidate are limited, a PAC can spend as much as it wants on mailings, television promotions, or other advertisements supporting or working against candidates for federal office. This tactic is legal if these expenditures are not coordinated with the candidates' campaigns. Until the court's ruling in the 2010 Citizens United decision, these ads could not expressly advocate a candidate by using terms such as vote for or elect, but those restrictions were eliminated by the court's decision. Another loophole in the amended Federal Election Campaign Act of 1974 proved important in the 1990s. Soft money constitutes contributions to the political parties that are not subject to contribution limits and are designated for use on so-called party-building activities. The soft money loophole allows donors who had contributed the maximum to federal candidates to give even more money by contributing to the national party committees. The party committees then gave the money to state parties, which subsequently spent the funds on party-building activities under more lenient state regulations. Frequently, such soft money contributions benefited federal candidates by paying for voter registration drives, polls, and general party-based advertisements. Then, during the 1990s, the political parties began to use soft money for television advertisements that featured the presidential candidates but did not expressly advocate their election. The Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act of 2002, otherwise known as the McCain-Feingold Act, banned soft money contributions to political parties. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, campaign finance reform was a perennial topic in presidential campaigns, and candidates roundly criticized the role of special interests in politics. But members of Congress had little to gain from reforming the system that had brought them to office. Although various campaign finance proposals were considered, only one passed both the Senate and the House in 1992, and President George H.W. Bush vetoed it. Then in 2002, the world's largest energy trading company and one of the nation's biggest corporations, Enron, collapsed after an internal accounting scandal, leaving in its wake furious stockholders, employees, and retirees whose financial health depended upon the company. Investigations revealed extensive corporate fraud, including accounting improprieties that had enabled corporate leaders to lie about profits and debt. Investigations also revealed that Enron had contributed nearly $4 million to state and federal political parties for party-building activities through the soft money loophole. Public indignation at the scandal flared, leading to the passage of the McCain-Feingold Act. This bipartisan campaign reform proposal, named after its two sponsors, Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona, and Senator Russell Feingold, Democrat from Wisconsin, had been making its way at snail's pace through committee before the Enron scandal broke. The McCain-Feingold Act, formerly known as the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act of 2002, banned nearly all soft money contributions, although PACs can contribute up to $5,000 to state, county, or local parties for voter registration and get-out-the-vote drives. In this table, it shows that the law also increased individual contribution limits and regulated some independent expenditures advertising. Although the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act sought to fix many of the state's problems, some of the remedies remain in dispute. One aspect of the McCain-Feingold Act became the subject of a series of legal challenges. In 2003, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, an opponent of the act, and a variety of groups affected by the new law, including the National Rifle Association and the California State Democratic Party, filed McConnell versus the Federal Election Commission. The suit alleged that McCain-Feingold was a violation of the plaintiff's First Amendment rights. One aspect of the law to which the groups objected was a ban on independent issue ads, 30 days before a primary election and 60 days before a general election, in which a group purchasing advertising targeting a particular candidate for federal office. But the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of McCain-Feingold in a 5-4 decision. Then, in 2007, the court, in another 5-4 decision, did an about-face and created an exception to the ban on issue ads. In FEC versus Wisconsin Right to Life, Inc., the justices held that advertising within the 30 and 60-day window could not be prohibited, thus paving the way for its extensive use in the 2008 presidential race. Another loophole in the campaign finance law became apparent with the emergence of a new form of political group, the so-called 527. Named after the section of the IRS tax code that regulates such organizations, a 527 is a tax-exempt group that raises money for political activities, much like those allowed under the soft money loopholes. If a 527 organization engages only in activities such as voter registration, voter mobilization, and issue advocacy, it does not have to report its activities to the FEC, only to the government of the state in which it is located or to the IRS. Disclosure to the FEC is required only if a 527 engages in activities expressly advocating the election or defeat of a federal candidate or in electioneering communications. In 2004, two 527s, Swift Boat Veterans and POWs for Truth, which opposed the presidential bid of Senator John Kerry, Democrat from Massachusetts, and MoveOn.org, which opposed President George W. Bush's candidacy, grabbed national attention as each ran television issue advocacy advertisements across the country targeting and opposing candidate. Many observers viewed the emergence of these and other 527s as attempts to get around the ban on unlimited soft money contributions to political parties. Campaign finance reform advocates note that several 527s have been partially funded by large contributions from a few wealthy individuals, a claim bolstering the charge that 527s are a way to evade the soft money ban. In 2008, 527 spent about $200 million to influence the outcome of federal elections through voter registration and mobilization efforts, and through ads that, though purportedly issue-based, typically criticized a candidate's record. In the 2010 elections, 527 spent more than $154 million on federal campaigns. The year 2010 saw one of the most dramatic episodes in U.S. campaign finance history, with the Supreme Court's decision that corporations and labor unions are entitled to the same First Amendment protections that individuals enjoy. The impact of the Citizens United decision has been a continued expansion of political action committees as corporations and labor unions now recognize the uncontestable influence that they may have in federal elections. In the 2010 congressional elections, PACs played an important role in creating the most expensive midterm elections in U.S. history. The last time that the United States saw such an important campaign finance ruling was after Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, when the number of political action committees shot up dramatically. As this figure shows you, the number of corporate PACs all alone nearly doubled between 1977 and 1980. Many of those PACs were formed by corporations that do business with the federal government and by associations whose members' livelihoods are significantly affected by federal regulations, including defense contractors, agricultural producers, and government employee unions. The ballooning of the number of PACs over time is indicative of the increased power that PACs have wielded in campaigns for federal office since 1980, and in the light of the 2010 Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. Many campaign finance analysts predict that PACs will continue to increase both in number and in influence.